Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to be obviously covering the history of the four Imams. And as we go through this, as we start this class, I just want you guys to realize, obviously, that we're going to be covering this from many different directions. The goal of this is to really give you an overall perspective as to how these things develop, the character that these great men displayed. Also, some of the things that I feel like are intentionally neglected, which are their political roles, because these were intensely political figures. And the political role is probably going to be, for the vast majority of you, this is going to be the first time you hear any of these things, and it might shake you a little bit and rattle you a little bit, but it's better to address these things rather than to leave these things, undetermined and so on and so forth, and then you hear it from a different perspective outside of Islam, and you wonder, where did this come from? It's better that you actually get a good historical perspective, inshallah ta'ala, from our side. And it also, for those of you that have taken the Abadila class, the class on the Abdullahs, or if you've watched those lectures, those videos, it's going to connect, and inshallah ta'ala, this will be the cool thing, you'll actually see the connection now from the Sahaba to these Imams, and how fiqh developed as a result of the contributions of these great companions of the Prophet ﷺ. Then of course, the personal lives of all of these Imams, what they were like. Obviously, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make of them what He made of them, they had to be great, sincere human beings. And so we'll look into their personal lives, inshallah ta'ala, their personal virtues, their qualities, their sincerity, and their very different approaches to life. What's amazing about these four people is that just like the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, they were very different people. The way they approached the topic of wealth, the way they approached politics, the way they approached business, the way that they thought they should dress, the way that they thought they should talk, the degree of approachability, the way that they thought that they should speak to their students, how soon they felt like their students would be qualified, the leeway that they'd give their students. All of these things are very different with all four of these people. And then finally, inshallah ta'ala, what you're going to find is that all of these madhabs are connected, all of the four schools of thought, because we are actually going to do a brief overview of the usul of these madhab, how these madhabs view things, how they derived opinions, how these imams derived opinions. And so you're going to find that there are connections, subtle connections. Just as when we study the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, you study those lines and those connections, and it gives you a better overall perspective as to what was going on. All four of these Imams were connected in some way. All four of these schools of thought were influenced by other schools of thought as well, and they developed over time. And then inshallah ta'ala, the history of how these madhabs developed, where they are today, where the fiqh of these four Imams are today. So we'll start off with Imam Abu Hanifah rahimahullah ta'ala. And to start off with Imam Abu Hanifah rahimahullah, I want to start off by talking about Kufa. As we did with Al-Bukhari, we talked about Bukhara. I want to talk about the city that he was going to be born into and the context to which Imam Abu Hanifah rahimahullah ta'ala is going to enter into this world and influence it the way that he did. So we start off with Kufa, and if you look at this map, then you'll find that the city of Kufa is very, very, very close to the what's known as Najaf. And Najaf, the city of Najaf, it's only about 6 miles away actually. The city of Najaf is located on the banks of the Euphrates River, one of the rivers of Al-Jannah, a very historical river. In Iraq, it's about 100 miles south of Baghdad. And so you'll see Karbala is there. Karbala obviously is where the massacre of Al-Hussein radiallahu ta'ala anhu took place. So the political climate, you can already tell, is going to be just ripe with fitan and things of that sort, and trials and tribulations. Because this is a city that has witnessed much in regards to politics, in regards to ideologies developing and so on and so forth. It's really right in the center of it all. Okay, so Kufa and Basra and Baghdad. These are the three major cities that we see there in Iraq. And Kufa, unlike some of the other cities that were before the time of the Prophet ﷺ and so on and so forth, Kufa is really a city that developed in Islam. Okay, and it was conquered in the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu, after the victory against the Roman Empire in the Battle of Yarmouk in the year 636. The year 636. So obviously there were a lot of fronts between the Sahaba and the Romans and the Persians in the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So it's in the year 636 that Kufa is founded. And in fact, the name is given to it as well, of Kufa. And it was Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu sends a companion that is truly not only a governor, but a murabbi. He's someone that can really develop a place, that can really raise the people. He sends Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu ta'ala anhu, the uncle of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one of the 10 promised paradise, to the city of Kufa, to govern the people in Islam, to raise them, to develop the city, and so on and so forth. And when you study Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, which one day we will inshallah ta'ala in detail, it's a consistent theme with him that he would develop civilization, subhanAllah, that he would be sent to a place in its initial entrance into Islam, and he would develop that place. So Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he sent Sa'd radiallahu ta'ala anhu to the people of Kufa, and the people of Kufa gave Sa'd a really, really hard time. And in fact, this was going to be a consistent theme with the city of Kufa, is that no governor could handle it. Any governor that was sent had a rough time in Kufa. And Sa'd he complained about them, they complained about Sa'd. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu found Sa'd to be innocent. He obviously cleared him from everything that he was accused of. But Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he let him go, because of the what was going on between him and the people. He sent Ammar ibn Yasir radiallahu ta'ala anhu, someone obviously that holds very high distinction in the ummah as well. And he sent Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu was very close to Umar radiallahu anhu. And Umar said that I'm sending you to Kufa, not because I don't want you here. He said, I need you. And the letter that he sent with Ibn Mas'ud to the people of Kufa was actually that, look, لَقَدْ آثَرْتُكُمْ عَلَى نَفْسِي بِابْنِ Mas'ud, that I have preferred you to myself by sending you Ibn Mas'ud. He said, it's the most difficult thing in the world for me to send a man like Abdullah bin Mas'ud outside of Medina. But essentially, this is the last straw with you people. Like if Ibn Mas'ud doesn't work out with you people, then something is really wrong with you. I mean, everyone else, there could be some room. But Ibn Mas'ud is being sent to you now. And subhanAllah, Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu goes there and he develops Kufa into the center of Quranic learning. Madinatul Quran. Kufa becomes the city of Quran as a result of Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. They loved Ibn Mas'ud. Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhu taught them. He became their teacher. And that's why from the 10 recitations, the 10 qira'at, we find that 5 of them originate from Kufa. 5 of them actually come from the line of Kufa. Okay, from the 10 recitations, which means Kufa is the city of Quran as a result of Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhu going there and developing it. Okay. Also, Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu ended up sending to them, the last governor he sent to them was Mughira ibn Shu'bah, because the political problem still continued for the most part, but at least, they were learning and so on and so forth, and they were growing and developing. He sent Mughira ibn Shu'bah radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Now, when Umar passed away, Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu replaced Mughira ibn Shu'bah. Not because there was something wrong with Mughira, but because Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu, in fact, all of the khulafa would replace some of the governors. It was generally looked down upon to leave a governor in a place for too long. So they would rotate their governors. So he replaced Al-Mughira with Walid ibn Uqba, and things got very nasty over there. They got very bad. And Kufa once again became a place of fitan. It became a place where things developed, where lots of tribulations. The Khawarij developed and so on and so forth. Kufa became a place where you could grow a plot. And unfortunately, for the rest of the time of the Khulafa al-Rashidin, it became a place of agitation. It became a place that the Khulafa just couldn't figure out. Okay? So Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu, despite having put Walid ibn Uqba, despite again some of the Sahaba that had settled there at that point, Kufa becomes a place that turns on him in some ways, where the people of fitna develop themselves and they revolt against Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu then comes. And I'm skipping through this obviously because I just want you to get an overall picture of this place. Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu comes. And the people of fitna now have taken over Medina. So Ali wants to move the Khilafah from Medina. So where does he move it to? The first place outside of Medina to have Khilafah was Kufa. So Ali moved the Khilafah to Kufa, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And, there, Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu tried to establish himself in Kufa. Obviously, it didn't go well. Things, fitna took place in Kufa. It continued to take place in Kufa. And in fact, in many places in the Ummah at that time. And Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu was actually assassinated in the Masjid of Kufa. In the Masjid of Kufa by the Khawarij. So Ali radiallahu anhu was killed in that Masjid of Kufa. Then obviously the Khilafah goes to Al-Hasan for a couple of years. Then it goes to Muawiyah radiallahu anhu, and Muawiyah established the Khilafah where? In Damascus, in Ash-Sham. So the Khilafah went from Medina to Kufa to Ash-Sham. And Muawiyah was the beginning of the Umayyad dynasty, the Umayyad dynasty. The Umayyad period of Islam, the Umayyi period of Islam starts with Muawiyah. And Kufa never got along with Bani Umayyah. You have to understand this all the way to Abu Hanifah, by the way. Kufa never liked Bani Umayyah. All right, they always had issues with Bani Umayyah. When Yazid ibn Muawiyah took over, when Yazid ibn Muawiyah became the Khalifa, Kufa was the place actually where Al-Hussein radiallahu ta'ala anhu thought that he was going to, they called for Al-Hussein radiallahu anhu and said, we will support you against this man. And obviously things happened there, and Al-Hussein radiallahu ta'ala anhu was massacred right on the outskirts of Kufa. And subhanAllah, till today, Masjid Kufa, by the way, contains the tombs of some of the early supporters of Al-Hussein radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Muslim ibn Aqil, Hani ibn Urwa. It actually contains the graves of so many of those people that tried to make a political change at that time. And obviously, the massacre of Al-Hussein radiallahu anhu took place and his people right outside on the outskirts of Kufa in Karbala. And Kufa became sort of a place that was always watched and monitored, all right, by the Umayyas, because they knew that it was a place that was always volatile, that could always change. And so Bani Umayyah really used to subject the people of Kufa. So politically speaking, these people were frustrated for many years. And at that time now, Bani Umayyah is in Damascus, they're based in Damascus, and obviously the Umayyi Khilafah is a very disturbing Khilafah from Yazid ibn Muawiyah onwards. A very disturbing Khilafah with the exception of one man, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz rahimahullah ta'ala. Other than that, there are a lot of political abuses and things of that sort. And there are three groups that arose at that time. Three groups that arose at that time. All right? You had those that were called the Alawis. Now the Alawis means two different things in Islamic history. There are the Alawis that are the supporters of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu and the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the early supporters of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's family, the early supporters of Ahlul Bayt. They were called the Alawis. Later on, when, again, Shi'ism and this entire notion of supporting the family of the Prophet ﷺ was largely political early on, and then it became theological and developed into schools and things of that sort. Later on, you have the development of theological Shi'ism, and you have what's known as the Alawis. Okay, the Asad family, the Asad regime in Syria belongs to the Alawis, which are far out. They're more extreme than the Shi'as. They believe that Jibreel alayhi salam made a mistake in bringing the message to the Prophet ﷺ. He was supposed to give it to Ali radiallahu anhu. SubhanAllah. So the Alawis, theologically, later on in history, the group that's developed called the Alawis, is very different from the Alawis pre-Abu Hanifah and pre the four madhabs. Okay, so when you said Alawis at that time, you simply meant those that supported the family of the Prophet ﷺ and that were against the, they were the descendants of Ali radiallahu anhu, who was obviously related to the Prophet ﷺ, from the family of the Prophet ﷺ, and they were very opposed to the mistreatment, the way that the family of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu was treated. So you had that group that developed. Then you had Al-Abbasiyya, the Abbasids. And Al-Abbasiyya were the descendants of Abdullah bin Abbas radiallahu anhu, the cousin of Ali, the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ. They're the descendants of Abdullah bin Abbas. And they tried to revolt many times against the Umayyads, and they were unsuccessful most of the time until finally they overthrew them, which takes place in the lifetime of Abu Hanifah rahimahullah. The Alawis supported them. So politically speaking, there was an alliance between the Alawi group and between the Abbasids. All right? Then you had the Khawarij. And the Khawarij were the guys that just killed everybody. They made takfir on everyone. And the Khawarij arise, as the Prophet ﷺ said, in every single generation. And, they didn't get along with anybody. And they attacked this group and attacked that group. And unfortunately, it became a very nasty situation altogether. Now, Kufa and Basra contained the bases of all of these groups. That's the point here. Politically speaking, Kufa and Basra contains all of these groups politically. It was the home base of the Alawis, it was the home base of the Khawarij, it was the home base of the theological groups that were developing now, the Qadariyah, the Mu'tazila, people that denied the divine decree and so on and so forth, because political fitna gives, rise, unfortunately, to a lot of theological groups as well. And what's happening in Kufa now as well is that you have a lot of philosophies, outside philosophies coming into Kufa. So Greek philosophy makes its way to Kufa. All of the different words of Aristotle and so on and so forth, that all the works start to make their way to Kufa, and Kufa starts to develop strange ideologies at the same time. All right? So you had many deviant groups, many ideologies, many political groups, and it was also a very pluralistic society, meaning it was an accepting society. It was okay to an extent for a person to be completely on the opposite side of, understanding theology and so on and so forth. And Abu Hanifah rahimahullah is born into this environment, okay, where it's just all over the place. Kufa was all over the place. As far as, what the Umayyads tried to do, the Umayyas tried to suppress any discussion of government amongst the circles of scholars. Sounds familiar, right? The ulama were not allowed to discuss governmental politics. Why? Because they knew what pull the scholars had. And they didn't want the scholars saying anything. So if a scholar even hinted at his displeasure with the Khilafah, then he would be, oppressed and so on and so forth and imprisoned. So the scholars had to think of very tricky ways to criticize the government. Because of the situation that was there. So that's the political situation. What was the state of fiqh, the state of Islamic jurisprudence at that time? Between the Sahaba and this time. Okay? Before the four madhabs developed, and other madhabs as well, by the way, other schools which we'll talk about, there were three major schools at that time. Three major schools. You had Ahlul Hadith, the people of Hadith, Ahlul Ra'i, the people of Ra'i, the people of opinion, and you had the literalists, the Zahiris. So you got these three groups, three schools, general schools that develop and that span over the entire Muslim world essentially, three approaches. So Ahlul Hadith, the people of Hadith, it dominated Medina, it dominated Egypt, it dominated Ash-Sham, all right? And also parts, by the way, of Iraq even, Basra. All right, and we'll talk about this. So, you had Yemen even preferred this approach. Essentially, in Medina, you still had the children of the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ, and then you had Imam Malik, who became the undisputed leader of the school, which we're going to talk about. All right, Ahlul Hadith, the people of Hadith. In Egypt, you had a man by the name of Al-Layth ibn Sa'ad, and Al-Layth ibn Sa'ad is a teacher of Imam Malik, and again, Egypt now is under this way of thinking as well. In Ash-Sham, you had a man by the name of Imam al-Awza'i, who's also, by the way, Sahibu Madhab, who had a school of thought at his time, by the way. And Imam al-Awza'i, rahimahullah, was a Lebanese Imam. And Ash-Sham basically came under his approach as well, towards Hadith. And in Basra, which is just south of Kufa, all right, in Basra, you had Imam Hassan al-Basri, rahimahullah, and Imam Ibn Sirin, Hamad ibn Zayd. You had some great scholars there as well. So in essence, these scholars, they basically took a pure hadith approach to fiqh. This is the early development of fiqh in these territories. Just a very strict hadith approach towards fiqh, towards how they understood Islamic law and Islamic jurisprudence. And the scholars of Medina throughout the Muslim world were considered, the superior scholars. So anytime the scholars of Medina went to travel around the Muslim world, there was a huge gathering that would go around them. It was generally understood that they were closer to the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ, to the children of the Sahaba. And so when they went to any territory of the Muslim world, they were well received. Okay? And then even after Imam Malik passed away, this school continues all the way to Al-Bukhari, by the way, to his teacher, Ishaq ibn Rahaway. It continues, the school of Al-Hadith, the people of Hadith. Then you had the fiqh school based on independent reasoning. Al-ra'i is opinion, but what it really means is the use of reasoning, the use of logic. And the reason why they're called that is not because they rejected hadith, but because they used excessive reasoning, they used excessive logic. And they used a lot of analogy, qiyas, right? So they'd compare situations from the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ, from things that happened with the Messenger ﷺ, to their own situations, and they'd come up with their own conclusions and their own opinions from that. So the people of hadith, generally speaking, if there wasn't a direct, explicit, hadith to address a situation, or if the situation had not yet arisen, they wouldn't even talk about it. All right? The people of qiyas and the people of ar-ra'i, the people of reasoning, what they would do is they would take these ahadith and they would expand upon them. And especially in Kufa, this school is based in Al-Kufa. Why? Because Kufa was exposed to so much. Number one, they didn't trust hadith in Kufa because there was so much fabrication of hadith in Kufa. So much outside philosophy. There was such a need to debate with people that were coming from all over the other parts of the world, bringing their philosophies to shut down deviant groups, to provide logical reasoning and so on and so forth. So Kufa was sort of forced. The scholars of Kufa were kind of forced to be able to respond in this way to everything that happened. They took on a lot of philosophies. And Ibn Khaldun, he actually says in his historical book Al-Muqaddimah, Ibn Khaldun says that the Arabs in Hijaz, in the Gulf basically, they were away from city life. Whereas Kufa and Iraq had developed city centers. So they were just naturally more pluralistic. Also crafts and things of that sort. Sciences developed in Iraq. They didn't really develop in the area of Al-Hijaz, but they continued to develop in Iraq. So these scholars had to be able to address the challenges of their time. And they had to be able to expand. Now, Ahlul Hadith and Ahlul Ra'i, they kind of took shots at each other, especially in these early phases. A lot of misunderstandings would be worked out, but especially in the initial development of these two trains of thought, they used to take shots at each other. And there's a very beautiful book, if you guys get a chance to read it. It's called Hujjatullah al-Baligha. Hujjatullah al-Baligha by Ash-Shah Waliullah al-Dihlawi. It's a very famous book, a very famous work, Hujjatullah al-Baligha. And essentially he reconciles what happened with these schools, how the Imams came to understand one another, what happened when they actually interacted with one another. Before they interacted with one another, there were misconceptions. So the people of hadith thought that Ahlul Ra'i were actually rejecting authentic hadith, which is not true. And a lot of those misunderstandings would be worked out when the scholars actually started to interact with each other. So Imam Malik and Imam Abu Hanifah, when they actually met later on in life, a lot of these misunderstandings were solved. That they were not rejecting ahadith, but they would expand and they would extend and they would reject things that were not undisputedly authentic. Because they feared fabrication, they feared the use of ahadith for political gain. And that's where you see most of the racist fabricated ahadith. If you guys, any of you remember, there was a class that I taught called Black and Noble, right? A lot of the racist ahadith. If you wanted to forge something against the Persians, then you tried to fabricate a hadith about the Persians. That the language of the people of Jannah is Arabic and the language of the people of hell is Farsi, is Persian. This was a fabricated hadith. Or that I love the Arabs for 3 reasons. Because I am an Arab and the Quran is in Arabic and Arabic is the language of the people of Jannah. It's a fabricated hadith, right? All of these racist ahadith towards the Abyssinians. Horrible ahadith towards the Persians, horrible things that were fabricated, made up. And so, political ahadith, right? They would identify that the Prophet ﷺ said that this man will come from this people and his name's going to be this, and when you see him, kill him. They'd fabricate those types of ahadith. So the people, of Iraq, the scholars of Iraq from Ahl Sunnah said, we're not going to get, we're going to avoid these things unless we are sure that they are authentic, then we're going to favor instead our opinion and our logic and trying to understand things based on how we understand the Quran and the Sunnah and that which is definitely authentic. So a lot of these things were, the misunderstandings would be worked out in the time, of the development of these 4 Imams. And in fact, these schools would even start to mix. Okay? So you find that after the 4 Imams, which we're going to see, these schools really became hybrids. Ash-Shafi'i was really a hybrid between the two, between the people of Hadith and the people of Ar-Ra'i. He kind of combined the 2 schools. Even the students of Abu Hanifah started to interact with the people of Hadith and combine the schools. And they started to sort of take the best practices, if you will, from each of the schools and from the scholars that they interacted with from around the world. When the political fitna was rife, they weren't really talking to each other. Just everyone was kind of in their own spot and doing what they had to do to deal with the situation that they were in. And then you had finally the school of al-Zahiriyya, the school which is based on literal explanation or literal interpretation of the text, which means that we will ignore context, we will ignore everything behind this, and we'll just take it at what it appears to be. Zahir means the apparent meaning, right? So it is what it is, as it appears on the outside. And this is a school that was founded by a man by the name of Dawood ibn Ali, also from Kufa. Dawood al-Zahiri, Dawood ibn Ali, also from al-Kufa. They are the opposite of the people of Ra'i, the extreme opposite of the people of opinion and logical reasoning, because to them, not even even the context of a hadith is to be completely ignored. Just take the apparent meaning as it is, and there is absolutely no delving into it and so on and so forth. And obviously that was an extreme reaction, right? It was an extreme reaction at the end of the day. Now, moving on, inshallah ta'ala. So these are the three fiqh approaches that you had. The difference between the people of Iraq and the people of the Haramain as well, and this is very crucial, is that Malik and the people of Medina, they could come up with their methodologies in which they accepted the practice of the people of Medina and so on and so forth, because the tradition of the Sahaba was only removed, they had just been there. So nothing would be dramatically changed from the time that the Sahaba were in Medina or in Mecca, right? At that time, it's still within the first 100 years of Islam. So they took as a proof, as we're going to talk about, the practices of the people as a whole, because these were largely the children of the Sahaba and the grandchildren of the companions. The Iraqain, the people of Iraq, did not have this, they didn't have this luxury. Because Iraq was diluted with so many different ideologies. And by the way, Iraqain mean Kufa and Basra. The two Iraqs are Kufa and Basra. They didn't have this. And then finally, here you have the non-Arabs taking control of scholarship, which is just awesome. Because in the first 100 years of Islam, the vast majority of the scholars of Islam were not Arabs. And that drove some of the, the people of Asabiyya, the tribe, people that had tribalism and nationalism inside of them, it drove them nuts. How is it that you have all these Persians and Africans that have already, we're the grandchildren of the Sahaba and they've already taken it over, all right? And there's a very funny incident here which describes this, and it's typically put in the biography of Abu Hanifah, the founder of the fiqh schools, if you will, Abu Hanifah rahimahullah, because he's not an Arab. Al-Qadi Abu Layla, who's a tabi'i, Al-Qadi Abu Layla, he was someone that interacted with all of the schools of thought. He's someone that traveled and met the scholars of various regions. He sort of dedicated his life to meeting all of the different scholars all around the world and then developing his judgments. And that's why he became such a famed scholar. Al-Qadi Abu Layla, he said that once Isa ibn Musa, there was a man named Jesus, the son of Moses. Anyone named that? It's really cool. Isa ibn Musa. All right? But he said, once he came to me, وَهُوَ شَدِيدُ الْعَصَبِيَّةِ, and this man was a proud Arab. He's a proud Arab. And he said to me, مَنْ كَانَ فَقِيهُ الْعِرَاقِ, who was the faqih of Iraq? Who's the leader of the scholars in Iraq? So I said, Al-Hasan al-Basri. And he said, ثُمَّ مَنْ, then who? I said, Ibn Sirin. So Isa said to me, what are they? مَا هَؤُلَاء, what are they? He said, Mawali, they're Persians, from former slaves. The two greatest scholars of Iraq, of Basra here he means in particular, they're former slaves. They're Persians and they're not Arabs, they're former slaves. So he said, then Isa said, and who was the faqih of Mecca? Who's the leader of Mecca? Who was the greatest scholar of Mecca? He said, Ata ibn Abi Rabah, the great scholar of Sudan, by the way. The first mufti of Mecca was a man from Sudan, subhanallah. Subhanallah, I mean, immediately the asabiyya is just being broken from these people, right? It's just being taken out of them. It's being ripped from them. Then he said, ثُمَّ مَنْ, who after Ata ibn Abi Rabah? He said, Sa'id ibn al-Jubayr, also a Persian, by the way. He said, then who? He said, then Mujahid, the great scholar of tafsir. He said, then who? He said, then Ata ibn Yassar. Then he said, فَمَنْ هَؤُلَاء? Isa said, who are these people? He said, they're all non-Arabs. So he said, what about Medina? I said, Zayd ibn Aslam. And he said, then who? I said, Muhammad ibn al-Munkandir. He said, then who? I said, Nafi'. And he said, what are all of those people? He said, none of them are Arabs. So he said that Isa ibn Musa, his face changed colors, like he got really upset. And he said, what about Quba? And I said, Rabi'atul Ra'i and Ibn Abi Zinad. Rabi'atul Ra'i and Ibn Abi Zinad. He said, Ma ha'ula, what are these people? He said, they're not Arabs. He said, Mawali. So he said that his face started to boil with anger. Like he's like, what's going on here? He said, what about Yemen? And he said, Tawus al-Kaysan and Wahb ibn Munabbih. Tawus al-Kaysan and Wahb ibn Munabbih. He said, Ma ha'ula, what are these? He said, they're not Arabs either. So he said he stood up in anger. And he said, well, Khurasan, what about Khurasan? I mean, Khurasan, what's going to happen with them? Who were their leaders? So he said, Ata ibn Abdullah. And he said, who's Ata ibn Abdullah? Is he an Arab? I said, no, he's not an Arab either. So he said he started to pace. Isa ibn Musa, like what happened to the Arab, right? We lost them all. None of the leaders, none of the scholars of our lands are Arabs. So he said he started to pace. And he said, I got scared for him. All right, because he really looked like he was troubled. He was traumatized by this. So he said, what about Ash-Sham? So I said, Makhul. Makhul was the faqih of Ash-Sham. And he said, was he an Arab? I said, no. So he said that he started to have difficulty breathing. Right, like he started to, like what's going on with these people? So he said, what about Kufa? So he said, if I wasn't afraid that the man was going to die, if I told him who the real fuqaha of Kufa were, then I would have said to him, Hakam ibn Utbah and Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman. But he said, instead, I said to him, out of fear for him, Ibrahim al-Nakha'i and al-Sha'bi. These were two great scholars, Ibrahim al-Nakha'i and al-Sha'bi. And then he said, what are they? I said, they're Arabs. So he said, Allahu Akbar. And he sat down and he was like, we got some, right? Some of the scholars remained amongst the Arabs. So this shows you, subhanAllah, that like within the first 100 years of Islam, it spread amongst the Persians, it spread amongst the Africans, it spread amongst everyone. You know, it was not necessarily reserved for the Arab. Okay? Now enter Abu Hanifah. The Prophet ﷺ was once sitting with the Sahaba, and this hadith is in al-Bukhari. And Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu said he was teaching us Surah al-Jumu'ah. And the Prophet ﷺ recited, وَآخَرِينَ مِنْهُمْ لَمَّا يَلْحَقُوا بِهِمْ. Okay? وَآخَرِينَ مِنْهُمْ لَمَّا يَلْحَقُوا بِهِمْ means others from amongst them who have not yet joined them. Others from amongst them who have not yet joined him. Or joined them, sorry. So they said, Ya Rasulullah, who are these people? And the Prophet ﷺ didn't answer. Then we asked him twice. Then 3 times. Then Salman al-Farisi walked in. Salman the Persian walked in, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And the Prophet ﷺ, he put his arm around Salman and he said, لو كان الإيمان عند الثرايا لناله رجال من هؤلاء. Even if faith, لو كان الإيمان. And now الثرايا means it's like hanging amongst the stars. Even if faith was left amongst the stars, hanging amongst the stars, one of this man's descendants is going to surely grab it. The ulama understood this to be Abu Hanifah rahimahullah ta'ala. In fact, Ibn Hajar, who's the greatest, Fath al-Bari is the greatest explanation of al-Bukhari, he referred to Imam Abu Hanifah rahimahullah, the Imam who could have reached the sky. The Imam who could have reached the sky. And Imam al-Suyuti rahimahullah says this was a bushra, this was the glad tidings to the ummah of Abu Hanifah. That this Persian man is going to come and he will reach this knowledge even if it's left and hung amongst the stars. And the Prophet ﷺ on another instance, by the way, he kept on pointing to Salman radiallahu anhu. When the ayah, وَإِن تَتَوَلَّوْا يَسْتَبْدِلْ قَوْمًا غَيْرَكُمْ. If you turn away, a group of, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will replace you with someone else. They asked the Prophet ﷺ who that is. He said Salman and his descendants. Meaning the Persians in particular, Ahlu Fars, they were really going to play a very, very pivotal role in the early development of Islam. And the Prophet ﷺ said that Salman radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who was a freed slave, Salman radiallahu anhu, he said that Salman is from my Ahlul Bayt. He's from the people of my household. I consider him like family to me. All right? So we get to Abu Hanifah rahimahullah, and Imam al-Dhahabi rahimahullah, he says that after he wrote the volumes of, in Siyar A'lam and Nubulat, the biographies of the other Imams, he said that because he gave one volume to each of them. He said that Imam Abu Hanifa's life requires 2 volumes. That, I should write 2 volumes for Imam Abu Hanifa. And really, Imam Abu Hanifa's life is going to explain everything, by the way. It's going to really lay the ground in politics and in fiqh for how the other Imams will interact with both of those 2 very important fields in Islam. So, you find many different things about him. The books of virtues about him are many. Some of them exaggerated, some of them fabricated, some of them authentic. And so you have to be able to sort through it. Obviously, there's a great level of asabiyya, a great level of love that the people had for their Imams. So they would exaggerate some of the qualities of their Imams and so on and so forth. And so you have to sometimes be able to navigate through it and choose that which is authentic, choose that which is acceptable. And Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, he was born in Kufa in the year 699, which is 76 years after Hijrah, the year 699. And he died in Baghdad in the year 767. Okay, so he lived for 68 years. He only had one son by the name of Hammad. Okay, the big dispute over Imam Abu Hanifa from the very start is he a tabi'i? Does he count from the 2nd generation or does he count from the 3rd generation like the other Imams? Is he one of the tabi'in? The dispute over that is whether or not he met some of the companions who were still alive. There were companions that were still alive when Abu Hanifa was born into this world. The most likely for him to interact with was Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, because Anas ibn Malik was settled in Basra. And he lived, Abu Hanifa rahimahullah lived up until the age of 14 or 15 while Anas ibn Malik was still alive radiallahu anhu. So even though there is no, no completely undisputed claim of a meeting between them, it's unlikely that he didn't meet Anas ibn Malik and didn't meet Jabir ibn Abdullah and didn't meet some of the companions that were still alive at that time. So most of the scholars said, yes, he is from the tabi'een. He actually falls in the 2nd generation of this ummah, because it's very unlikely to say that a man like him did not meet any of these scholars. And Anas ibn Malik was known to come to Kufa as well. And Abu Hanifa comes from a religious family. And when Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu is going to come to a city, everyone's going to go out to see him. Anyone that would consider themselves righteous is really going to go out to see him and meet one of the last companions of the Prophet ﷺ, and the man who lived with the Prophet ﷺ for so long and documented so much of the Prophet ﷺ's life. All right? The story of his parents is a very interesting story. His father's name is Thabit ibn Zulta ibn Marzuban. Thabit ibn Zulta ibn Marzuban. Doesn't sound like an Arab name, obviously. Where is he from? From Kabul, from Afghanistan. Okay? You're welcome. MashaAllah, the one Afghani in the class is happy. Alhamdulillah. All right? Or do we have more than one Afghani here? Oh, we've got 2. Saeed, you too? MashaAllah. Okay. So we got 2 Afghanis here. So Thabit is from Afghanistan. He's from the freed slaves of Afghanistan. Came into Islam as a freed slave from Afghanistan. And Abu Hanifa's grandson, Ismail ibn Hammad ibn Nu'man, the grandson of Abu Hanifa, he says that we are from Abna'i Faris al-Ahrar. We are from the free children of the people of Persia. He said that I swear by Allah that we were never slaves. And my grandfather was born the year 80 after Hijrah, so he's referring to Abu Hanifa. And he said his father, Thabit, the father of Abu Hanifa, as a young man, served Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu made dua for him and his offspring, and we hope that Allah answered the dua of Ali radiallahu anhu for us. Meaning Ali took this, subhanAllah, we saw it in Salama going to Hassan al-Basri and Ummahat al-Mu'mineen. Right? The power of these du'as, the power of these supplications that were made by these companions. SubhanAllah, Ali ibn Abi Talib saw the grandfather of Abu Hanifa and he served him, and he made dua for him and his dhurriyyah. He made dua for him and his children. And we hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answered the dua of Ali ibn Abi Talib for us. And subhanAllah, the personality types, when we talk about the influence of the Abadila, the great Abdullahs from the companions, the personality types even came into these Imams. Because Ibn Mas'ud, who will influence the Hanafi madhab most, who will influence Imam Abu Hanifa most, Ibn Mas'ud was someone that gained his respect and his honor purely by knowledge and not by his lineage. No one can claim that Ibn Mas'ud reached the position that he reached because of his family or because of his lineage, and the same is true for Abu Hanifa. right? And you'll see that the same thing, Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, who's from the family of the Prophet ﷺ, from the Abadila, influences Ash-Shafi'i, who's also from the family of the Prophet ﷺ. And Ibn Umar, who lives in Medina and who loves the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and imitates him, influences Imam Malik. So the personality types are also coming into the lives of these Imams, and we find very similar life stories as well. Now the parents of Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, their story of meeting is truly a phenomenal and beautiful story, and it shows you الطيبون للطيبات, pure men are for pure women. Thabit ibn Zulta, he was once walking, and this is before he gets married, to the mother of Abu Hanifa. And as he was walking, there was a tree of fruit and it was hanging over the fence of the garden. So just imagine that you're walking and you see this garden and you see this tree and it's hanging over the fence. So he grabbed one of the fruits and he ate it. Then he felt bad. So he went back to the owner of that house and he told him, look, I ate one of your fruits, I want to pay for it, and I feel bad, I didn't ask your permission, and so on and so forth. And the owner of the house, he said, you really want to make it up to me? I said, yes. So he said, marry my daughter. So he was like, okay, that's a pretty sweet deal, but he said, but here's the thing. He said, my daughter is deaf, she's mute, and she also has issues with, she also is not mentally all there. She's not going to really, she doesn't understand much. She's deaf, she's mute, and in one narration, she's even blind. All right? So this no longer appeared to be such a sweet deal for him. So he said, are you still willing to do it? So Thabit said, let me think about it. And then he came back to me and said, if this is the only way you'll forgive me for taking that fruit, subhanAllah, he feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that fruit on the Day of Judgment. He said, I'll do it. If this is the way to gain your forgiveness, I'll do it. So he entered upon this woman the first time and he said, Salamu alaikum. And he didn't even look at her because he was like, this is going to be a disaster. And she said, Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So he looked at her and he was like, what? Like, you heard me and you can speak and you can see, and she was also a beautiful woman as well. So he's like, what is this? Your father said that you were like this. And she responded and she said that I am deaf from all of that which is displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't hear backbiting, I don't hear lying, I don't hear slander. I have purified my ears from al-laghu, from idle speech. I don't even listen to that stuff. She said, I'm mute from speaking in a way that Allah is not pleased with, and my eyes are blinded from the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told me to lower my gaze from, and I have purposely put myself into ignorance of knowledge which is not beneficial. I've purposely remained ignorant of that which is not beneficial to me. SubhanAllah, that was her answer. And they got married, and from this marriage comes Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala. So it starts off with the righteous parents. It starts off with an instance, subhanAllah, of righteous parents. You want righteous children? Think about it before you get married. And for those of you that are already married, may Allah help you all right? But those of you that aren't married, you still have hope, okay? Go steal someone's apple and see how that works out for you, all right? No, I'm just playing. But, think about righteousness, the righteousness of your children before you actually get married. It starts off with the parents. Now, Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, his name was An-Nu'man, all right? His name was An-Nu'man ibn Thabit. And his physical appearance is that he was very tall, very handsome. He had brown skin. He had the mark of sujood on his forehead, a very clear mark of sujood on his forehead. He had the mark of tears on his cheeks from the amount of crying that he used to do. And one thing about him, he wore the nicest of clothes. He was very well dressed. And subhanAllah, despite the marks of tears and the mark of sujood and so on and so forth, always smiling, always laughing, a very easygoing person. And subhanAllah, when you study the life of Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, it's amazing how easygoing he was. Very easygoing person. He also, the first two Imams of the four Imams were very wealthy. Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik, when you study them, you're going to study very rich, wealthy men, very well dressed, very high in their society and things of that sort, that lived very good lives. All right? So you're not going to study, and that automatically shatters the appearance of the Imams of the past. They weren't hermits. They weren't living in masajid and things of that sort and not interacting with their society. They were both very, very successful people, lived in very nice houses, ate very well, dressed very well, and had that sort of influence on their society. So how does he get rich? Where does the wealth come from? His father was Khazzaz. His father was a silk trader. Okay? And Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala grew up helping his father in business. So he learned very early on how to make patterns, how to sew clothes together. So Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, his description as a merchant, by the way, and subhanAllah, this is just how smart he was. All right? He was able to look at a piece of cloth and without really touching it, he could already tell you what its material was, whether it was good quality or not. He could guess the price by looking at it, and he could look at the cloth. He could properly choose them when he went to the marketplace and bought cloth. And then when he put it together, Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah was very skilled in making patterns and so on and so forth. So Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah was a skilled silk trader very, very early on with his father. All right, he helped his father, and subhanAllah, the narrations actually, they say that he went with his father to business when he was 5 years old. Like his father started bringing him along and he started learning the trade, he started teaching him when he was 5 years old. Now, what was his father's reputation in the marketplace? Remember Imam al-Bukhari's father? His father's reputation was two things. Number one, halal wealth. Halal rizq. The man will not earn a penny of haram. He will not jack up a price on you. He will not swear by his product, which the Prophet ﷺ forbade, to say, Wallahi, this is the best out there. He wouldn't do any of that. Very honest businessman, and he was known for his taqwa. He was known for his fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he was so afraid of wronging anyone he did business with in the marketplace. You know, subhanAllah, I always hear this, because we're going to talk right now. I want to talk about how Imam Abu Hanifa was as a merchant as well. Before and after he becomes a scholar. You tell someone to leave haram earning and haram income, and they say, if I do that, then I'm going to be broke. And that shows that you've forgotten who Ar-Razzaq is. You've forgotten who the one who gives sustenance is, right? That shows that you actually have an issue in your creed. If you think that by giving up haram, Allah is going to put you into poverty. So these people were very, very, very honest. Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, that's his reputation as a businessman as well. He never lied about what he had, never lied about his product. He never took advantage of an ignorant customer. Because nowadays, mashallah, there are a lot of ignorant customers, and we're usually of them, the ignorant consumers. You walk into a place, and because it has a certain brand name on it, and because of whatever, a few sentences, you'll pay a few $100 extra, because it's supposedly a lot better, but the quality of it, we can't even tell, we can't look at it. All right? So he didn't take advantage of those people. He never swore to sell a product. He never made a profit off of a poor person. Which means that if Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah had someone in front of him that was clearly barely making it, Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah would sell the garment to that person at cost price. He wouldn't make a profit off of someone that was in difficult circumstances. He never lied about a defect in a garment. This was common, especially back then in the aswaq. It still is in the marketplaces, right? If you have something in the food that's not really good, then you hide that part with a good outer appearance. If a cloth has a defect in it, then you find a way to patch it up, whatever it may be, put something on it, stitch over it. So he never lied about any defect or any damage of a garment. Another thing about him, which is very not like the Muslim world today, Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah only sold at fixed prices. Never bargained. He just felt like it wasn't his thing. So if you gave him a price he didn't like, he just said, sorry, jazakallah khair. He wouldn't sit there and bargain with you. He felt like it wasn't, he just didn't want to do it. It's not haram to bargain, so don't be afraid when you go to Hajj and Umrah, you have to bargain. All right? But Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah said, look, this is what it is. This is the price of the garment. I'm not being rude, but I'm not going to sit here and argue with you and say 500, 400, 300. Khalas, this is what, and I honestly am giving you what is the price that I paid for it, and I had a set amount of profit that I'm making off of each garment, whether it was 50 dirhams or something like that. That's it, khalas. I have my cost price, I put 50 on it, I sell it. So don't come up and try to bargain with him and argue with him. If you don't want to buy it, there are plenty of other, people there. And that shows you his dignity, by the way. The man had a lot of izzah, and that's not a bad quality to have. He didn't want to belittle himself. He felt like it would be beneath him to do so, not because of arrogance, but khalas. He didn't want to sit there and argue with people over the garment. So he never praised his own products. And this is also something very, very, very rare. Never, like if you came to him, he wasn't going to say, oh brother, mashallah, let me show you this. This is the best product out there. I went myself to China and I got it, then I took it to Turkey and I crafted it my own self, and then this is the best thing out there, and that I'm not selling you. He never praised his own product. Like he refused to. It is what it is. You like it, you like it. You don't like it, you don't like it. And subhanAllah, there's even a story that happened with his son Hamad, because he did what his father did. His father took him at a young age and made him help him out in silk trading. He brought Hamad, his own son. And Hamad one time was with him, and Hamad would just imagine a business, subhanAllah, like any business. He had his stool, he would stand up on his stool, he would get whatever clothes were there, whatever garments, and then he'd pull it out. And one time a man came and he said, how much is this? And Imam Hanifah rahimahullah said, it's 300 dirhams. Okay? So he said, can I see it? So Abu Hanifah said to Hamad, go get it. So Hamad got up and Hamad looked at the garment and he went, Allahumma salli wa sallim ala nabiyyina Muhammad. He did salawat. But he's looking at this like, man, these are some nice clothes. So Abu Hanifah rahimahullah, he said, alayhi salatu wassalam. He said, yes, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. But he says, laqad madahtuhu. لَقَدْ مَدَحْتَهُ. You praised it. So he said, لَا بَيْعْ وَلَا شِرَاء. He said, I'm sorry, I can't sell this to you. The man's like, what? Like, what do you mean you can't sell it to me? Abu Hanifah said, it's a principle that I have. I don't praise my own garments and then sell them. SubhanAllah. So the man's like, it's okay. All he said was salawat. And Abu Hanifah was like, I'm sorry. I don't praise my own products, my own inventory. And this is against my principle. So he told Hamad to put it back, and he told the man, you could look at something else. I'm not going to sell you that garment. SubhanAllah, this is how strict he is. And another time, you had a woman that came to him and tried to sell him clothes. And Abu Hanifah rahimahullah, when she tried to sell it to him, she said 200, this is for 200 dirhams. He said, it's not worth 200 dirhams, it's worth more. Like, you imagine someone coming to sell you a garment and they say, I'll give it to you for 200. Now, I'm not saying go on eBay and put on a bid and then say, you know what, I'm sorry, actually, seller in China, this iPhone case is worth a lot more, right? But the point is look at the honesty of this man. This person comes to him and says, 200. And he says, it's, I don't want you to get a bad deal. It's really worth more than 200. So she said 300. He said, it's worth more than 300. She said 400. He said, it's worth more than 400. So the woman said, are you making fun of me? I mean, if you don't want to buy the garment, just don't buy it, right? He's like, no, I'm telling you the truth. It's really worth a lot more. Like, you're going to get a bad deal out of this. The garment you're trying to sell is a lot better than you think it is. So Imam Hanifah rahimahullah said, wait here. So he went and he called another guy that had his shop and he said, come see this. So he brought him over and he said, how much is this garment worth? So the man looked at it, he said about 500 dirhams. So the woman was shocked. So Imam Hanifah rahimahullah said, do you want to buy it from her? She's trying to sell it. He said, yeah, sure, I'll take it for 500. So he bought the garment and the woman's looking at him like, subhanAllah, like I brought it to, she was about to give it to him for 200. He said, no, it's worth more. Got the other guy from another shop, right? Said, okay, do you want to buy it for 500? And he bought it. So he was that honest to that point. And subhanAllah, even after he became an alim, even after he became a scholar, he went into business and he had, basically what he did was he dedicated his time. He'd come up, in the morning, open up his shop, do what he had to do. Then he had a partner that would watch it by the name of Hafs ibn Abdurrahman. He told Hafs ibn Abdurrahman, you watch it and then I'll come back at night and so on and so forth. All right? So Hafs ibn Abdurrahman one day, he told him that there is a defect in this cloth. Don't sell this cloth unless you show the person the defect. Meaning, don't forget there's a defect. It's very subtle, it's very hidden, but make sure you show it to that person. So Imam Hanifah rahimahullah left in the morning on that understanding. He came back and he didn't see that garment. So he said to Hafs, what happened to the garment? And he said, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. I forgot what you told me. Naseet, I just forgot. And it really was that subtle of a defect that he forgot to show it just because, he was in the process, he's in the marketplace, things are moving really fast. And he forgot to. Imam Abu Hanifah rahimahullah said, do you remember the customer? He said, no. Do you remember who it is so we can go back to that person, reimburse them, do something? He said, no. He said, how much did you sell it for? He said, about 500 dirhams. Imam Abu Hanifah rahimahullah was so upset by that he fired Hafs, number one. He broke his partnership. He said, look, I can't trust you with this stuff anymore. And he gave his entire day of sadaqah away. He gave his entire day of profit away. Not just the 500 dirhams, he's, as a means of seeking forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he gave everything away that day. Because he was so afraid of haram money coming into his possession that he wanted to get rid of it. SubhanAllah. He just wanted to get rid of the money that day, fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that. And he went and he got another partner. So you have that with the business side. Now, what was he with his money? What was he like with his money? SubhanAllah, he brought his son, and every day, these are the simple things. Now, I know a lot of these things, you just look at them and you say, I can't do that. Every day Imam Abu Hanifa would give his son 10 dirhams and say, go give it to some of the poor. Every single day at the end, as they were closing up their shop, he would say, take these 10 dirhams and go find the poor and give it to them. So he's also teaching his son sadaqah. He's teaching his child sadaqah at a very early age. And also we find that, subhanAllah, every Friday on the day of Jum'ah, Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah used to give 20 dinar of charity. Now dinars are gold coins. He would give 20 dinars of sadaqah on behalf of his parents who had passed away. His parents passed away when he was still a young man. So he would give 20 dinars on behalf of them, as the Prophet ﷺ mentioned sadaqah jariyah, a continuous charity, every single Friday. We see that once he loaned a man of money, so he was someone that used to loan people money as well. And he loaned this man 10,000 dirhams, which is a pretty large sum of money, and the man was supposed to pay him back at a certain time, and the man couldn't come up with it. And the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that those who are easy with taking back their loans will have the shade of Allah's throne on the Day of Judgment. He mentioned them as one of the categories of those people that will be under the shade of Allah's throne. You loan someone money and they're unable to make it on time, and you go easy on them. You tell them, it's okay, take a month, take 2 more months, take your time, do what you can. So this man was so shy, and he was like, Abu Hanifa is going to call me out in front of everyone. You took money from the Imam of the city, someone who's very well known. Imagine if Abu Hanifa stands up and says, that guy that you guys know, Ahmed, he owes me 10,000 dirhams. Imagine what would happen to him. So he just went into hiding. So Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, one time he was walking in the marketplace, and the man went and hid behind someone's booth, because he saw Abu Hanifa. And Abu Hanifa went up to him and he said, what's wrong? And the man said, he started giving him all these apologies, like, I'm sorry, I couldn't come back to you. This happened and this happened. The same story every time. I've got a hungry daughter in the car and I don't have enough gas. And the story that you hear at every gas station. Gave him a long story, I can't pay you back, and so on and so forth. Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah said, you've been hiding because of that? And he said, yeah. Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, he hugged the man and he begged him for forgiveness for making him feel like he had to hide his face in society. SubhanAllah, look at the difference in character here. He's like, don't worry about the loan. He's like, I'm sorry for making you feel that way. That you even had to hide from me and hide your face in society because you couldn't pay 10,000 dirhams. We also find that one of the people he loaned the money to, and this is his fear of riba as well, his fear of interest as well. Interest is a serious thing. We're not talking about the percentages here. We're talking about something very subtle. One time he's walking out and he started to rest under, again, there were trees that were coming out of someone's garden. It was covering a certain area, so he rested under that shade. And he said, by the way, do you guys know who this house is for? So they said the name of a person that Abu Hanifa had given money to. He loaned him money. So Imam Abu Hanifa got up and he sat outside of the shade and he sat in the sun. And he said, why are you sitting outside of the shade? And he said, because I fear that Allah will consider it riba. Allah would consider it interest if I benefit from His shade as well as the money that He's going to pay me back with. SubhanAllah, I don't even want to benefit from His shade, And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala charged me with that on the Day of Judgment. There are many, many different things. There are so many things, incidents with his money. But I'll just mention 2 more, then inshallah ta'ala we'll move on. There's a narration from Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu ta'ala anhu that Ali was asked, how much money do you need to survive? How much money do you need to do well? So he said 4,000 dirhams. All right, 4,000 dirhams. So Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, he would always count his money to 4,000 dirhams, and anything above that, he would give it away in charity. So he took that principle of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu to only keep with him 4,000 dirhams and to, support students of knowledge, to feed the poor, and so on and so forth. Now that's obviously something very, very hard to do. But it's just to mention his virtues here. And one of the most beautiful things I'll mention here as well with his sadaqah, he used to tell the people that he'd give money to, he would say to them, spend to fulfill your needs. Go ahead and fulfill your needs. And don't thank anyone except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't thank anyone except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said, I did not give you anything of my own possession. This wasn't my wealth that I gave to you. But it's a blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that was transferred to you through me. And he said, this is the profit of your own spending. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed, this money will come to you because of something that you did or because of Allah's mercy upon you. I was just the means, like I'm just the middleman in this transaction. So don't thank me and don't praise me. This is from Allah to you. And Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he actually said, when you give sadaqah, don't see yourself as giving charity to a person, but instead see that Allah is using you to deliver money to someone that Allah has decreed for them. And you're just blessed to be in the process, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used you as the middleman. So now we talk about the development of the Imam, the Sheikh. People in the marketplace back then, as many people do now, do you think that they just sit there and they just not talk about anything, that they just sit there and look at each other? No, people in the souk used to talk about religion and politics. Right? And if they had cricket or soccer or football back then, I'm pretty sure they would talk about that stuff too. Right? But religion and politics, even if they knew nothing about it, these were discussions. People would sit and talk about the news of the day. Right? And, they didn't have cell phones to distract them and things of that sort. So they had no one to talk to but each other. Okay? So it's not like everyone was sitting behind his booth. No, they were talking to each other. So Imam Abu Hanifah rahimahullah gained a reputation from speaking to people and so on and so forth, and that being a very bright and intelligent man, being someone that was good at debating the issues of the day. He was very much in tune with what was going on with the religion, with the politics. And by the way, these are turbulent times. Imam Abu Hanifah rahimahullah, before he's a scholar, this was the time of Hajjaj. Hajjaj killing people, wreaking havoc on the ummah. One of the men that Abu Hanifa met as a child and loved, Sa'id ibn al-Jubayr, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Sa'id ibn al-Jubayr was so great that Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhu, someone came to him from Mecca, he's like, Sa'id ibn al-Jubayr is in Kufa, why are you coming here? Sa'id ibn al-Jubayr revolted against Hajjaj and was murdered by Hajjaj. So politics was a hefty topic, it was a heavy topic in the souk, and they would also talk about religion. And so now you have the first influence in Imam Abu Hanifa's life outside of his parents. You have a man by the name of Amir ibn Sharahil al-Sha'bi. Amir ibn Sharahil al-Sha'bi. Al-Imam al-Sha'bi. Imam al-Sha'bi rahimahullah is a man. Al-Sha'bi, what does Sha'bi mean in the Arabic language? What does Sha'b mean? People, right? So what would Sha'bi mean? He's good with people. Sha'bi literally would mean you're popular. So his nickname was the popular Imam. He was a popular Imam. Why was he so popular? He was hilarious. All right, he was really, really funny. He was really knowledgeable. He was a great scholar of fiqh, great scholar of hadith, very sharp man, very intelligent man. But he was really, really easygoing and funny and popular. SubhanAllah, he got along with everybody. So everyone, when they would say which Imam, they would say Ash-Sha'bi, right? The one that everyone loves. SubhanAllah, which shows you again, the influence that's going to be in Abu Hanifa's life is going to be a very healthy influence. Imam Ash-Sha'bi is a man that would always joke around, even in his fatawa, even in the way that he responded to his questions. Someone asked him, there's a very famous question, someone asked him, what was the name of Shaitan's wife? What's Iblis's wife's name? You talk about, ilm la yanfa', knowledge that's of no benefit. What is it going to help you to know the name of Shaitan's wife? All right? So Imam al-Sha'bi said, I don't know, he didn't invite me to the wedding. So he was hilarious. And subhanAllah, multiple fatwa from him. That you can even see the humor in everything he responds to, there's humor in it. SubhanAllah, he always throws in something there to make it lighthearted. One time he was asked, one time he was asked while he was walking with his wife, they said, are you a Sha'bi? He said, no, she's a Sha'bi. She's more popular than I am, right? She gets along with people better than I do. And subhanAllah, he used to joke around with his family, he used to joke around with people. One time he wanted to be left alone in the house, so he drew a circle on the door because people would just keep coming to his house and bothering him. So when he's trying to study, everyone's bothering him, right? So here's what he did. He drew a circle on the door and he told his wife, he said, if anyone comes here and asks for me, point to the circle and say he's not here right now. That way you won't be lying, right? Just say he's not here right now. All right? Don't say he's not here, just say he's not here right now so I can have my time to study and to prepare. So Sha'bi rahimahullah is walking in the souk one day. He's walking in the marketplace and he sees Imam Abu Hanifa. And Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah is not known to any circles of knowledge. He's never studied fiqh. He's just a really honest, good merchant, young man, 20, 21 years old. So, he's a really just handsome, bright young man. He sees him having conversations with the people in the souk. He sees him debating. And Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah says, مررت يوما على الشعب وهو جالس قد دعاني فقال لي. That one time I was walking in the souk and I saw a Sha'bi and he was sitting down, and he called me, فَقَالَ لي, and he said to me, إِلَى مَنْ تَخْتَلِفْ, who do you go to? Who do you go to? إِلَى مَنْ تَخْتَلِفْ, who do you go to for your issues? Who do you go to study with, and so on and so forth? And Imam Abu Hanifa didn't understand the question. So he said, أَخْتَلِفُ إِلَى الْأَسْوَاقِ, like I go to the marketplaces. Right? He said, no, that's not what I'm talking about. He said, I'm talking about min al-ulama, from the scholars. Like, who do you study with? And Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah said, nobody. So he said to him, لا تغفل, don't live your life like a heedless man. وعليك بالنظر في العلم, and focus on learning beneficial knowledge. ومجالسة العلماء, and sitting with the scholars. فإني أرى فيك يقظة وحركة. I see in you ambition and energy. You have in you special qualities. Don't waste your time. Like, you need to go and learn. You need to go sit with scholars. You're a brilliant man. Don't let your mind go to waste. And he keeps on praising him and encouraging him and saying to him, look, go study and make something of yourself. You don't belong here just as a silk trader. SubhanAllah, look at how one person's encouragement can lead to a complete change of life, a complete change of heart. Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah said, فَوَقَعَ فِي قَلْبِي مِنْ قَوْلِهِ, that what he said really entered into my heart. It penetrated my heart. When he said to me, look, you have a scholar of that stature look at you and say something about you, subhanAllah, a few words, someone that you admire, someone that you look up at you and look to you and say, you have potential. It means the world to you, right? SubhanAllah, Abu Hanifa has the most popular Imam of his time, Ash-Sha'bi, saying to him, I can see things in you. And that's why the scholars say, قَوْلٌ مَعْرُوفٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions a good word in the Quran, how it can be better than sadaqah. Some of the scholars, they said, قَوْلٌ مَعْرُوفٌ. Sometimes you could encourage someone. You could say nice words to someone, whether it's your child or a little brother or a friend. You encourage someone to do something. And because of that, they become great people and become houses of sadaqah, charity, and leave beneficial knowledge, and all of that goes back to you. Meaning the entire legacy of Abu Hanifa goes back to Ash-Sha'bi for that one conversation in the marketplace. Just like if you remember Ishaq ibn Rahaway with al-Bukhari, saying, I wish someone would make a book of hadith and make it easy for the people. And he goes and authors Sahih al-Bukhari as a result of that. That's all his hasanat, that's all his good deeds. So Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah said, it really got to me. So I said to him, who should I go to? He said, well, what do you want to study? He said, well, what is there to study? He said, you could study hadith. Imam Abu Hanifa said, what do people of hadith do? He said, well, they look at the narrators and they can see if they're trustworthy or not. They scrutinize and so on and so forth, scrutinize chains, they memorize and so on and so forth. He said, what else is there? He said, there's tafsir, Quran, talking about the Quran, explaining the ma'ani al-Quran. He said, well, what does a person who does that do? He said, he'll learn and he'll teach and he'll sit in the masjid, he'll give lectures about Quran and so on and so forth. Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah said, what else is there? Now, he didn't ask him about al-i'tiqad, about creed and theology. And I'm going to mention that in a moment because that is very, very, very significant about his personality. The ideologies and so on and so forth of that time. He didn't ask him about aqidah. He said, what else is there? He said, fiqh, jurisprudence. He said, what does a faqih do? So he said the faqih, and subhanAllah, look at how Ash-Sha'bi understands fiqh. He said he interacts with the people, understands their problems, understands their issues, then goes back to the Quran and the Sunnah and tries to find things that are applicable to them. Meaning a faqih in his nature, if he sits in a masjid and doesn't interact with the people, then his fiqh is going to be off. It's going to be deficient. Because one of the first things that a faqih, a scholar, has to know is ilmul makan wal zaman. He needs to know his time and place. He needs to know his context to properly be able to give fatwas that deal with them. And he sees fuqaha as people that help people. So Abu Hanifa said, I like that one. I'll do fiqh. Who should I go to for fiqh? SubhanAllah, this is his conversation. He said that you could go to Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman. So it's going to start off with Hamad here. Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman, the first teacher that Abu Hanifa is really going to spend time with. Now, I want to bring up something here. There were a lot of ideologies here, a lot of theologies, creeds, movements. Why didn't he study that? Because Imam Abu Hanifa, at a very early age, when people would start to debate these things, subhanAllah, look at his words. He said, I don't want to have anything to do with these debates. They said, why? He said, because it seems like the only thing you do in these debates of aqa'id, of creed, is you try to make the other person a kafir. I see no good in that. Like at the end of the day, what you're trying to prove is that the other person is outside of the religion. Doesn't understand aqeedah, doesn't understand the religion. Isn't that what all debates of aqeedah tend to be? Respond to this person, respond to that. He said, what good is that? I don't see any good in that. In debating over theology and ideologies and then making the other person out to be a kafir. And Imam Abu Hanifa said a powerful statement which we should apply in our times, because one of the most powerful movements of his time was the Khawarij. Right? The extremists that made everyone out to be a kafir. They did takfir on everybody. Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, he said, for me to deem 1,000 kuffar, 1,000 disbelievers, as believers by accident is more beloved to me than to deem one believer a kafir. I'd rather make a mistake and say that 1,000 people that are in truth disbelievers are actually believers, like make a makhraj for them, make a way out to say that they are actually believers, than to take one mu'min, one believer, someone who's in actuality a believer, and say that he's a non-believer. I don't like that. That's not my thing. And subhanAllah, that tolerance, by the way, will show itself in his madhab as well, in his school of thought as well. So he didn't want to have anything to do with that. Now, one thing also that's very important is that just because Ash-Sha'bi told Abu Hanifa that now you need to spend time with the scholars, doesn't mean Abu Hanifa sold his business and said, I'm not going to work anymore, and I'm just going to go become a scholar and see how things go from there. He continued to be a successful businessman. And some of the people criticized him for that. They're like, you could do so much more if you just sold your business, Like the ummah will take care of you. There were salaries. There were, people, contrary to what people think, people did pay for Islamic education back then. We'll see it in Ash-Shafi'i. Ash-Shafi'i couldn't afford to get in halaqat too. They had classes. The ulama were paid as, on the basis of their teaching as well. Right? Abu Hanifa is the exception here. So he said to Abu Hanifa, look, you don't need to own a business anymore. Just sell your business and, we can take care of you. People will take care of you. You'll be well off. And he said that, he said, I don't want to become dependent upon the people so that the people start to think that I'm being unethical. Meaning, if I maintain my financial independence, if I'm giving fatwa, then I'm not going to be at the mercy of the people here. It's very hard to give a fatwa against the guy that pays your salary, isn't it? Right? What's the problem that we have with our masajid structures today? Right? The imam is not truly an authority in the masjid because the imam at the end of the day works for the board, and a lot of times the imam is subjected to that. He's not able to speak. So Abu Hanifa said, I'd rather maintain my financial independence so that I can be completely free of this and say whatever I want to say. Then he said something powerful. He said, you don't learn true tawakkul, true trust, and true ethics until you own a business. Like when you own a business and deal with the people, that's when your taqwa is really put to test. Your tawakkul in Allah is really put to test. The bad months, the good months, even people that invest in things, like your tawakkul in Allah is going to be put to the test. It's going to be put to trial. You're really going to go through things. And if you don't fear Allah, the first place that it's going to show is in the way that you deal with your money. If you have a deficiency in your taqwa, it's going to show in your money, in the way that you deal with your money. So he remained in his business, and not only that, he used to buy clothes for his students. So when you became a student of Abu Hanifa, he'd dress you in a uniform. He'd get you nice clothes, nice shoes. He'd sponsor your household if he had to, if he saw potential in you. And some people said to him, why do you dress so nice? And why do you make your students dress so nice? And he said that this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means when he says, وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. Rasul, to show the blessing of Allah upon you. The Prophet ﷺ said, if Allah has blessed you with something, then you show it. It's not showing off. He said, rather it's that people don't feel bad for you and feel that you're in need of them. Like there was a culture that the students of knowledge were all poor and they were in need. He said, I don't want people to feel bad for tulab al-ilm, for the students of knowledge. I want them to understand we're dignified, we're fine. And he said, if the kings knew the happiness that we were in, if the kings knew the happiness that we were in, they would send their armies to sanction us and take it away from us. Meaning we are so pleased in our ilm, like we're happy in our ilm, we're pleased in our pursuit of knowledge. If they only knew where true happiness comes from in studying and in learning this religion, then they would send kings to sanction us. Okay, so he remains successful in his business, but again, he gets a partner to watch at times when he can't be there, and he continues to monitor it, and Allah continued to put barakah in his business. He died very wealthy, rahimahullah ta'ala. Very, very, very wealthy. We also see now, let's go to the teacher. You guys want a break, or you want to, should we go for another 10, 15 minutes? Should we take a break? 10, 15 minutes or not? Should we go through his teachers or not? Okay. His first teacher, Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman al-Kufi. Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman al-Kufi. Hamad, rahimahullah ta'ala, was only 9 years older than Abu Hanifa. All right, so he's not much older than Abu Hanifa, but he was a brilliant faqih. Okay? Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, he says about his journey with Hamad. He says, فَصَاحِبْتُهُ عَشْرَ سِنِينَ. He says that I became his student for 10 years. No one else but him. For 10 years, I stuck with Hamad. He said, ثُمَّ نَزَعَتْنِي نَفْسِي لِطَلَبِ الرِّيَاسَةِ. He said, then my nafs told me that I should go become a scholar now. That I have, and subhanAllah, he's being honest. He said, my nafs, myself deluded me into thinking that I should have my own halaqah now. He says, فَأَحْبَبْتُ أَنْ أَعْتَزِلَهُ وَأَجْلِسَ فِي حَلَقَةٍ لِنَفْسِي. So I decided, I love that I would, I want to have my own halaqah now, and I can leave him and I can do my own thing now. He says, فَخَرَجْتُ يَوْمًا بِالْعَشِي وَعَزْمِي أَنْ أَفْعَلْ. He says, so I went out one day, and it was inside of me that khalas, I'm going to tell Hamad that I'm going to leave him and I'm going to do my own thing. He says, فَلَمَّا دَخَلْتُ الْمَسْجِدَ وَرَأَيْتُهُ. He said, when I entered into the masjid, I was about to tell him and I saw him sitting there. He says, لَمْ تَطِبْ نَفْسِي أَنْ أَعْزِلَهُ. He said, like my nafs wouldn't allow me to leave him. He says, فَجِئْتُ وَجَالَسْتُ مَعَهُ فَجَاءَهُ فِي تِلْكَ اللَّيْلَةِ نَعْيُ قَرَابَةٍ لَهُ قَدْ مَاتَ بِالْبَصْرَةِ. Hamad was originally, it seems like he might have been from Basra. So he said that one day, after I was sitting with him for some time, one of his family members passed away in Basra. So he left to Basra. وَتَرَكَ مَالًا وَلَيْسَ لَهُ وَارِثٌ غَيْرَهُ. That this relative of his that died in Basra had no inheritor except for him. So Hamad was going to inherit the money, and this was also a relative, meaning he really had to go there. He says, فَأَمَرَنِي أَنْ أَجْلِسَ مَكَانَهُ. So he told me to sit in his place. So this was his first experience as teaching. He says, فَمَا هُوَ إِلَّا أَنْ خَرَجَ حَتَّى وَرَدَتْ عَلَيَّ مَسَائِلٌ لَمْ أَسْمَعَهَا مِنْ. He said that's when I started to hear questions and things of that sort that I'd never heard before. And he says, فَكُنْتُ أُجِيبُ وَأَكْتُبُ جَوَابِي. I would respond to these questions and I would write down my answers. He says, فَغَابَ شَهْرَيْنِ. Then, Hamad was out for 2 months. ثُمَّ قَدِمْ. And then he came back. فَعَرَضْتُ عَلَيْهِ الْمَسَائِلِ. I told him what was asked to me and how I answered. وَكَانَتْ نَحْوًا مِنْ سِتِّينَ مَسْأَلَةً. And there were 60 questions or so, 60 answers that I gave. And he says that فَوَافَقَنِي فِي أَرْبَعِينَ وَخَالَفَنِي فِي عِشْرِينَ. He agreed with 40 and he disagreed with 20. He says, فَآلَيْتُ عَلَى نَفْسِي أَلَّا أُفَارِقَهُ حَتَّى يَمُوتَ. I told myself, I'm never going to leave this man until he dies. And that's exactly what happened. Abu Hanifa stayed with Hamad until his death. He had one teacher for this entire time, Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman. And subhanAllah, the description is that when Abu Hanifa first got to the halaqah, he sat in the back. He just sat in the very back. This was his first exposure to knowledge at that level. So he goes and he sits in the back. He said then Hamad recognized that he was answering in a certain way, that he was really participating well. So Hamad told him, come sit in the front row. So he started to sit in the front row. Then, within just a matter of a few months, every time Hamad sat down, he told Abu Hanifa, come sit next to him, like he was his assistant. So Hamad knew how special the student of his was. And Hamad, because it shows you the effect now of a teacher on a student and how it carries over, Hamad used to buy things for Abu Hanifa. He used to, bring him into his house. He used to go with him he used to keep him with him in very personal situations. And we see Imam Abu Hanifa would do the same for his students. Hamad's sister, by the name of Atiqa bint Abi Sulaiman, she said that Abu Hanifa came to our house every single day. Abu Hanifa used to come to our house every single day. And he said he'd always be carrying something, like he's carrying the groceries or he's carrying, the books of Hamad, whatever it was. He comes carrying something. Then as soon as he puts it down, he starts to sweep the floors in the house. Then he goes out to the backyard and he starts to milk the goats. Then he brings the milk to us. Then he goes outside and he starts to pick the cotton and the grains and whatever it was that was out there. And he comes and he serves that. And Hamad is telling him the entire time, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. But Abu Hanifa was serving his teacher, subhanAllah. And he said that anytime someone came to ask Hamad a question, Abu Hanifa basically became his secretary. So Imam Abu Hanifa would stand outside and he'd take the question, then he'd go into Hammad. He had that access to his house. He'd go into Hammad's house and he'd tell him that, this person has such and such question, what do you say? Then he'd go back to them and answer the question. So he became the secretary of Hammad. And Hammad, he says that when my father, Hammad had a son in Basra. And he said, when my father came to Basra in those 2 months, where someone passed away in his family, he said that he would cry every day, and we thought he was crying because of the death of his relative. Until we asked him, why are you crying every day? And he said, I miss Abu Hanifa. SubhanAllah, think about the love that he had for him. Like, this is very powerful and profound, the love between the teacher and the student. That, I'm missing Abu Hanifa. And he said it's as if no one from his family passed away. Like, he's crying about his student that he's going to go back and see. He said, I miss Abu Hanifa. And so he loved Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. Abu Hanifa loved him, and Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah had such respect for him. Imam Abu Hanifa, he said that Hammad lived 7 blocks away from me. 7 blocks away from me. And he said, Wallahi, I never even stretched my legs in the direction of his house or used the restroom in the direction of his house. And obviously he's exaggerating, just talking about how much I respect him. How much I learned from this man, even though he was only 9 years older than me. So he even said it. He was only, we're in the same generation here, but he's only 9 years older than me. They're technically, the same age. It's not the story of this really old man and this really young man. He's only 9 years, but he said, I respected him so much. And he says, and this is beautiful, he says, Wallahi ma sallaytu salatan. Mundu an mata Hammad. He said, I swear by Allah that I've never prayed a prayer since Hammad died, passed away. إِلَّا اسْتَغْفَرْتُ لَهُ مَعْ وَالِدَيَّ, except that I sought forgiveness for him when I seek forgiveness from my own parents. وَإِنِّي لَأَسْتَغْفِرُ لِمَنْ تَعَلَّمْتُ مِنْهُ عِلْمًا أَوْ عَلَّمْتُهُ عِلْمًا. And he said, I always seek forgiveness from my teachers and all of my students. So subhanAllah, istighfar, that's the best way you can reward your teachers, is to make dua for them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive them. So he said, not a single salah, except that I sought forgiveness for Hammad, and I would always seek forgiveness for all of my teachers, anyone that I learned from and anyone that I taught. Hammad passed away at the age of 49 years old, when Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah was 40 years old. And Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah automatically assumed Hammad's spot. It was natural that Imam Abu Hanifa, who's been sitting with him for all these years, next to him as secretary, that when Hammad passed away and he was the alim of Kufa, the scholar of Kufa, it was just natural that Imam Abu Hanifa moved into his spot, and it was with absolutely no objection. So none of the other students of Hammad thought that they were on the level of Abu Hanifa, which is very rare in Islamic history. Usually when the teacher passes away, there's a whole, 5-6 years of fighting over who his greatest student was and who's the person that should succeed him. When Hammad passed away, Abu Hanifa just slid in. It was a natural progression. But Imam Abu Hanifa continued to be a student as well, and this is powerful. It's not like he just took the place of Hammad and he stopped learning. He continued to travel. He continued to go back to Ash-Sha'bi and study from him. He went to Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, studied with him. Okay, he went to the great scholars that he could. Sa'id ibn Jubayr, it seems at some point, he met him. He traveled the Muslim world, and he met the great scholars from other lands. So he studied with Ata ibn Abi Rabah, the Mufti of Mecca that we spoke about. He met Nafi', Mawla ibn Umar. Nafi', the freed slave of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu. He met him and he spent some time with him in Medina, and he's one of the main teachers of Imam Malik. And so he exposed himself to all of the different schools, which makes him the balanced person that he is, by the way. He exposed himself to the people of hadith. He exposed himself to all of the different schools of thought that were out there, all the different fiqhs that were out there. He studied with the family of the Prophet ﷺ that was left over. So there's a great Imam by the name of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. Now Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, the Sunni Imam Ja'far, is very different from the Shi'i Imam Ja'far, in the sense that the account of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq from the perspective of Ahl Sunnah is that this was a great Sunni Imam. This was a great Imam that taught all of the 4 Imams narrated from Imam Ja'far. Abu Hanifa was born the same year as Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, but he was a student of him. He was a student of his father, Muhammad al-Baqir, rahimahullah, the family of the Prophet ﷺ, those that were left over. And inshallah ta'ala, I'll go ahead and I'll give you guys a break. Then we're going to talk about his qualities. We're going to talk about his politics, his madhab, and the legacy of that madhab. So we'll take a 10-minute break, inshaAllah ta'ala, and we'll start back at 9:45. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.